By devoting just 6 minutes each weekday for 1 year, you can read through the entire New Testament using David's servant's daily devotional, HeavenWord Daily. Order your copy at heavenword.tv.
Thank you so much for joining me as we continue our chronological study through the entire New Testament. And today we're back in Matthew chapter 27, right in the middle of the story of Pilate's examination of Jesus. You know, of course, that the Jewish leaders who wanted Jesus dead needed Pilate's help in their evil plan because they were not permitted by Roman law to execute anybody. They needed permission. And so they had to convince Pilate that Jesus was worthy of death, a very difficult task. Pilate shows himself as being somewhat of a righteous guy in the story because he finds Jesus innocent and argues on behalf of Christ, advocating that he is not worthy of death. Last time we jumped over out of Matthew's gospel into John's gospel because John gives us more detail about this guy, Pilate. And I might mention to you that Pilate is certainly a man of history, although there was no archaeological evidence that proved the existence of Pilate for hundreds and hundreds of years. And for that reason, some skeptics doubted the biblical account, although you do find him mentioned in a couple of secular sources. But lo and behold, 1961, they discovered a stone there at the ancient port of Caesarea in the Colosseum there, the ruins of the Colosseum. There is Pilate, and he's put a stone there, I think in honor of Tiberius Caesar or something to that regard. But there's Pilate's name, and I've actually seen that stone, and it's the archaeological proof the man existed. Now, Josephus, an ancient Jewish historian, and a guy named Philo, or Philo, depending on how you might pronounce his name, another ancient Jewish historian, both mention the reign of Pilate in Judea and his many problems that he had with the Jews of whom he was supposed to be ruling over. They portray him as a really godless man. Of course, they were both Jewish writers, and they would have had a bias against him, but portray him as, at bare minimum, a very insensitive man. So this is not the first time he's had to tangle with Jewish leaders over something that they want him to do that he doesn't want to do. And perhaps in that backdrop, it gives us understanding why he ultimately caved in to their demands, even though he did not agree with them. Because, as a politician, you balance and juggle an awful lot. And in order to placate them at times, to make up for times when he didn't placate them, this time we'll give what you want. It's going to cost the life of one innocent guy. So we were jumping over to John chapter 19. And after Pilate had Jesus scourged, because he's already capitulated to some degree, and he's hoping that they'll say, this is enough. So after 39 lashes by what we would call a Roman cat o' nine tails, this is not just a whip, but a leather whip with several leather strands coming from it, to which are tied pieces of glass and sharp little pieces of metal and so forth. So when it goes in your back, when you pull it, it tears. And people died from receiving the 39 lashes, the scourging, and so forth. So Jesus the sight of his bleeding body would have, evoked sympathy in normal people. Of course, the guards had placed a crown of thorns on his head at this time. When Pilate brought him out before the Jewish leaders and the people whom they had assembled there, he's wearing a purple robe, but yet no doubt he is bloodied and beaten. And I think, it doesn't say this in the Bible, it would just seem that Pilate is trying to use that as a means to garner some sympathy amongst the crowd there. Look, we scourged him. How about that? Won't that be enough? Do we have to go all the way to crucify this guy? And so verse number 5 of John 19, then Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, behold, the man. So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify, crucify. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. He's disgusted with these guys. The Jews answered, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. And so now they've really spilled the beans as to why they're really there and what they really have against him. He's provoked them to utter what's really in their hearts. Oh my goodness, in verse number 8, therefore when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Who wants to condemn an innocent man? But my goodness, what if? What if? And although John doesn't tell us about this, we'll go back to Matthew's gospel. Matthew tells us that Pilate's own wife came to him during these proceedings and said, have nothing to do with that righteous man, because I suffered greatly in a dream because of him. So she was certainly aware of what was going on, and whether this dream was a God-given dream or just a dream out of her own mind combined with the thoughts in her own conscience, she's telling her husband, he's a righteous man, and anyone who condemns a righteous person is not a righteous person. And, the thought is planted in Pilate's mind now, this guy's claimed to be the Son of God. What if? What if? What if? Excuse me, verse number 8, Pilate was even more afraid. Verse number 9, he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, you do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you? Now here's a sentence that I just absolutely love because it reveals some deep theological truth that we can apply in our own realms. Verse 11 of chapter 19 of John, Jesus answered, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. And so this is reiterated in Romans chapter 13. Paul writes, all authority is from God, and there are no authorities that exist apart from God, that he's established all authority. Anyone who has authority over other people, it's been granted or given by God. And I like to think that's mostly granted, because the people that have authority are not always the good people. Sometimes they're awful people whom God uses, though, as a means, a tool of his judgment and discipline upon those who need to repent. Okay, something else is really interesting brought up by this very verse. I want to talk about it next time. So I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.